Welcome to episode 71 of the Twig Snapper Podcast. Today I'm joined by Spiros Anastas. And before we get started, I just want to give a thanks to the Portage Lake Pioneers for the last episode for this hat. We're here with Spiros. So how you doing today?
Doing well, Alex. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was looking forward to this. You've got a lot of hockey experience at many different levels. I'll just list the things so the audience can get an idea of what you've done. You played at Lebanon Valley College. You were a 4-year captain, and then you were assistant coach there and a volunteer assistant coach with Western Michigan. You were GM with the Alberni Valley Bulldogs, an assistant coach with the Grand Rapids Griffins, head coach at the University of Lethbridge, head coach and director of operations in the Coast with the South Carolina Stingray and the Brampton Beast. Toronto 6 assistant coach. You're currently a scout with the Manitoba Moose, and you've also been an assistant coach with Canada for the university games. You were with South Korea with their World Cup teams and World Junior Cup teams. You were team consultant with Estonia and a coach with their junior teams and their Baltic Cup team. And then you were with Serbia with their junior teams and their World Cup teams. So I think I got everything you've done, but you've been all over the board. So there's definitely plenty of things to talk about. I guess we could just start by like your time with Lebanon Valley College. And, when you were playing, did you know you wanted to coach after?
No, not necessarily. I had an idea that I wanted to stay in the game, but I was kind of wrestling with two kind of life options at the time. I had done 2 separate internships. One was in the finance industry with Northern Trust and on Bay Street in Toronto. So I kind of thought that might be an avenue, and it was more related to the education that I was getting at Lebanon Valley. But I'd also done an internship with, at the time, the CMG Sports, which is now RSG, which was a professional NHLPA certified agency. So that was kind of where my head was at, and wrestling between those 2 options of whether I wanted to get into finance or get into the player representation side. And I thought both would be pretty seamless in terms of the education I was getting or further education I was going to pursue. So coaching actually wasn't in the forefront of my kind of future until I kind of fell into it by accident. So yeah, as you mentioned, my first coaching job was with my alma mater, but it was actually midway point in my senior season that I actually got to coaching. I had a season-ending injury, and they had just made a coaching change and elevated our assistant coach at the time. And basically, I was asked if I wanted to step in as an assistant for the remainder of my senior year. So it was kind of happened by accident, but I've never looked back since.
So you went from student athlete to coach within a matter of days.
Yeah, pretty much. It was over the winter break. So there was a little bit of time between my last game played to my first game coached. It wasn't it wasn't only like 7 days, because obviously we played the weekends. But it was we weren't a very good team, and we had some ups and downs, and we'd been through 3 coaches in my 4 years there. So it was pretty seamless for me as somebody who was a captain for a long time to take over that leadership role, because I had kind of already been in one. So it was as easy of a transition as it could be.
Yeah. Your story is definitely the true story of like starting at the bottom and kind of working your way up. You starting at, coaching assistant coach with Division III and working your way all the way up to coaching assistant with AHL, coaching national teams, and now you're scouting in the AHL and coaching in the Coast. So you've kind of worked your way up through all these different levels. How did you end up getting with the national teams? I think the first one was Canada with the university games, and then it was South Korea, if I looked at the timeline on Elite Prospects. So how did that all shake out? How did you end up with those teams initially?
Yeah, so a lot of stuff, sometimes happens, for lack of a better term, by luck. But it's people that you meet and people and people that you impress upon. So yeah, the Canada at the World University Games was my first international experience, but I had committed to being with the Koreans prior to that. So when I was an assistant coach with the Grand Rapids Griffins, my fellow assistant was Jim Pack. And we left the Griffins the same year, and he had left to become the full-time director of hockey and head coach of the Korean national program as they were gearing up for the Olympics. And he's of Korean descent, so it was a real perfect match for him. And that same offseason, I had left to take my first head coaching job with the University of Lethbridge. And at my wedding, actually, because I got married that summer of 2014, is when Jimmy had told me that he was taking that job with Korea. And I had already announced that I was going to Lethbridge. And we kind of just got talking. It literally was at the ceremony of my wedding night. And he asked what my spring is like with this, at the time, with the CIS job. And I said, you win the whole thing, the national championship, you're done second week of March, but we're definitely not doing that, because I had taken over a real poor performing program. So I was like, I'll probably be done mid-February, end of February. And that's kind of where he asked if I'd commit my springs to working with the Koreans, as the head coach of their U18 team, and then helping him as his second assistant with the men's team, because Richard Park, another former NHLer of Korean descent, was the other assistant. So that's how I got involved. And it was really exciting. I was supposed to see it through to the Olympics, but, then life kind of gets not in the way, but life starts to happen. You start having children, and being away for 10 to 12 weeks at a time is real tough. So I didn't see it through to the Olympics. But once you're into the IHF subdivisions, you start to meet a lot of delegates from other countries, and you start to kind of network with people. So that kind of just spilled into my next opportunities with Estonia and eventually Serbia, just getting to know people around the world. So it's a real enriching experience, and I'm lucky that Jimmy had asked me to get involved. The Canadian thing with the World University Games, it just got lucky at the time. Every couple of years, the three conferences would just rotate which conference would send representatives between the Atlantic Conference, the Ontario Conference, and the Western Conference of CIS hockey. So my first year in Canada West hockey is Canada West's turn. And honestly, it usually went by seniority, by coaches. And I was in my first year. But I was fortunate that a lot of coaches didn't want to go. So I was literally the last option and the only one left. And I was a new coach, and I said, sure, I'll go. So that one was pretty much pure luck of a lot of people. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. A lot of these, it seems they just kind of like fell into your lap. They weren't things that you had planned out, or weren't things that you were expecting to be in your future necessarily. With the different international teams, I guess I didn't realize that, most of them had, or at least some of them had, people that weren't from their nation coaching. Were you coaching with other people from their nation on your staff? Or did you get to, how did you get to assemble your staff, I guess is what I'm asking, or did they assemble the staff for you?
A little bit of both, but in every scenario that I was with, except for the Korean men's, I mean, Richard Park and Jim Pack were of Korean descent, but they were respectively Canadian and American guys. But every other position I've had, from U18 Koreans to all the junior teams with Estonia and the men's and junior teams with Serbia, I've worked with domestic coaches, but I've had a little bit of say on which ones. Like Estonia, we did a pretty thorough interview process of a number of guys who would join me at the national teams. In Serbia, I got to meet a couple guys. So yeah, it's a little bit of both, but they've been domestic guys from the country, and it's a really unique experience too, because you take on an added responsibility of trying to coach and teach them as well, with the ultimate goal of eventually the domestic coaches being able to take over and represent their countries as head coaches. So it's been really cool to learn, because you come in as the, quote unquote expert, because they tend to believe that you have a better experience than them, but there's just as much learning on my end of things as there is on their end of things when I go to places like that.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have to learn all those different languages, or at least bits and pieces, just to get by, or did they speak a lot of English where you didn't have to?
Usually it depends on the country. Usually the men's teams across the board speak English, just because they're all pro players and they play in various leagues. And even in their own domestic leagues, they'll have non-local guys. So they pick up English as they go. The junior teams gets a little bit more dicey. The Korean U18s, most of the guys didn't speak any. So, I learned some key terms of, just some cues that you can give, but I find that you need an interpreter maybe for a week. And after you spend some time and the players get to know you and you get to know them, you almost develop a language of your own. Obviously I'm communicating in English, but they understand what I'm expecting or what the verbal cues are. And you don't really need the interpreter anymore because they know what the structure and what the expectation and, what the system is. So you can communicate with them. And even if they don't speak English per se, they identify the words and the instruction that I'm giving. So, but it's really cool because it stretches you as a coach, and it teaches you about different communications and, methods and abilities. So it definitely something that's helped me along the way, even coming back to North America when I'm coaching.
Right. It's hard enough sometimes to communicate with your players when you all speak the same language. And then, you got guys who speak a different language than you primarily. I can imagine it added some difficulty. But like you said, I mean, in the end, you're all speaking hockey language. You all know hockey. So there's, like you said, different terms that they can recognize and systems that they can understand. If we switch gears here a little bit away from the international teams to the coast and your time there, on Elite Prospects, it said that you were the head coach and the director of hockey operations. So what sort of added duties did you have on top of being a head coach with that director of operations?
Yeah, so it's a pretty common title in the ECHL. It's a unique one, and it's funny because a lot of me and fellow coaches, we chuckle about it sometimes because the ECHL is an interesting league. There's a lot of there's private ownership. There's presidents that have roles, and they view the general manager term as something different, like a general manager of business operations or hockey operations. So essentially, every head coach in the ECHL is a GM head coach. Just the titles get a little funky sometimes. There's head coach, director of player personnel is the guy in Fort Wayne. There's head coach, director of hockey operations in a place like South Carolina. And then there's a couple guys that hold the GM head coach title. But at the end of the day, they're all GM head coaches because you're responsible for the transactions. You're responsible for the salary cap, the weekly, roster input to the league and stuff like that. So that's all it really is. You're a GM head coach. It's just each team has a different title. The one that pops up the most is head coach, director of hockey operations because the guy who runs the entire operation is the general manager, and that title means something a little different in the ECHL than it does in other hockey leagues. They're not putting the rosters together, but they're generally managing the business.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. And you get that question a lot, and it's an ongoing kind of topic of conversation amongst ECHL coaches or coaches that have been in the league. But that's what it is. You manage the roster, you make the transactions, you manage the salary cap, you recruit through the offseason. So whether you're director of hockey operations, director of player personnel, or the GM on top of the head coach, it's all the same. It's just whatever the title is. So, but it's a real cool league to get that experience in. It really expands your horizons and gets you a little of the management piece on your resume. So it just, I think, makes you a better coach and gives you a little bit of management experience for future jobs or opens up a couple different pathways for young coaches that are trying to learn.
Do you think for a guy like you, was it difficult at all to be coaching, in a league like the Coast where you've got some guys that maybe have been in the A, you've got guys that are coming up. So you've got a lot of guys with various experience and, and they look at you and they see that, you didn't have much of a playing experience, but, you're coaching all of these guys who've played at various levels. Do you think that, puts guys in a tough spot coaching wise?
Yeah, I mean, that's an ongoing challenge for a guy like me. And there's guys like me from the junior ranks right through the NHL that their playing experience isn't much of a playing experience. Like I was fortunate to get some education out of playing and play at a decent level, but to a lot of guys that it's almost like I didn't play at all. Right. So that's a constant challenge. I think it's more of a challenge for guys like me in securing jobs and going through interview processes when the decision makers are guys that, played in the NHL or are managing NHL teams. It's a lot easier when it comes to coaching players. Players just want to be communicated with. They want to know and feel secure in that you know what you're talking about and that your messaging is clear. So I've actually never experienced a challenge. I coached in the American League probably at a time that I wasn't ready for it at 27, 28 years old. And my approach with the players is all that mattered. How I presented the video, how I built the relationships with them, how clearly I communicated the messaging from the coaching staff to them. So no, it's never been a challenge in that side of things. It's more of a challenge in trying to secure jobs. And it happens all the time. Like I've dedicated more than a third now of my life to this profession. And I'll lose a job to a guy that's never coached a single game in his life, but he just stepped right out of an NHL locker room. And that's just part of the game. And you just kind of find what your value add and what your kind of value proposition is to try and get those jobs over those people.
Yeah. So some places value that playing experience more than other places would, and other places might value your, lengthy coaching experience through various different places.
Yeah, for sure. And there's pros and cons to both. And I've had those debates or conversations with former players that have stepped into roles, and they have other challenges. They didn't get to build that resume from 24 years old like I did, because they've been playing at an elite level through to their mid 30s. So they might look at guys like me being like, well, he got to build a resume from a young age. I didn't get to do that because I was playing. So you can look at it from either lens. So that's why you can't get too hung up on it. But in terms of your initial question with players just want to be communicated with. They want to be treated with respect, and they don't want somebody who's a pretender. So I've actually never, from the American League to the ECHL, never experienced a situation where someone didn't respect me because of my playing experience. They just base their opinion on coaches on the preparation and the communication, I believe.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I just wondered if some, because you get some guys obviously at varying levels of hockey that have different egos, and that kind of stuff can play into that. But as a player, obviously, like you said, you just want to be communicated with. You have a clear idea of what's expected, and the coach can help you develop. It really doesn't matter where they came from or what they've done, as long as they can help you. So I guess we can transition here again into what you're doing now, which is scouting with the Manitoba Moose. So at that level, what is your job? Like, what is your day-to-day? What do you usually do?
Yeah, so it's a unique position. Like the Winnipeg Jets have a number of pro scouts. I think there's 6 total on staff, and between 5 of them, they'll separate the NHL and American League teams, their American League affiliates. So they get 5 or 6 teams each, and that's what they cover through the year. But the Jets really believe in depth. They really believe in their American League franchise, the Manitoba Moose. So they hire a sixth pro scout, essentially, and that would be me. And there's the guy previous to me was really great at his job too, Ryan Caldwell, and he's been promoted up the Jets scouting ranks, and he's an NHL pro scout now. But basically, my job is to kind of backfill and take care of our depth between, from the Manitoba Moose. And it's not to say these guys aren't going to play for the Jets one day or aren't going to sign NHL contracts, but it's really kind of diving deep into the depths of pro hockey. And, it covers a wide range of potential players. So, I could have reports on guys that will be good NHL two-way contracts, but predominantly they're going to play for the Moose, but they're going to be veteran guys that can help the Moose get some wins, but also play a dual role and really help our young prospects of the Jets who are playing in the American Hockey League. It could be guys on American League one-way or two-way deals that we need to help boost our success in the AHL, or it could be guys that we just need for a weekend on a PTO coming out of the ECHL from any of the 28 ECHL teams. So it's a wide range of potential players that I'm looking at, and it's a real great start for me in the scouting side of things because it stretches me across 3 different leagues. So I watch the AHL, I watch the ECHL, and I watch the Canadian University ranks as well. And it's a real cool experience because you identify guys, you might have to watch them through the ECHL, you might have to watch them play for other American League teams. And if you can find a guy that can bring value to your American League franchise and then maybe even convert it into an NHL deal where they could be good NHL depth, it's really cool to kind of follow. So that's kind of the gist of my role right now. So I'd say I spend half of my time watching the ECHL and the other half's probably split between monitoring American League contracts and PTOs that are playing in the AHL, and then and watching the Canadian University ranks as well.
So when you're watching, guys from the coast or the AHL, are you specifically looking at guys that are going to be free agents in a year that you could possibly sign to boost the team next year? Like, do you look at that, like, how much time they've got left on their contracts and stuff like that?
Yeah, you're watching. It's funny when you're watching the ECHL, you're watching guys that are potentially on 3 different levels of contract. So you could be watching guys on NHL contracts, mostly that the time that's entry level deal guys. You could be watching guys who are on American League deals or guys that are in straight ECHL deals. So yeah, it's waiting for free agency to come out open. Obviously, the ECHL contracted guys, you can call them up on a PTO at any time. Trade deadline pieces. You always look at the NHL trade deadline. There's always big trades. Like most recently, the one that comes to mind is the Timo Meier trade. There's a bunch of names that the average fan have never heard of involved in that trade. That was like a 10-player deal, right? That's
Yeah.
where a guy like me kind of has to be ready, like have that information, because even in the depths of those trades, you want to bring in someone that could potentially provide some value, whether it's for your ECHL affiliate or American League affiliate. So yeah, it's a combination of things: free agency, trade deadlines, weekend call ups. But we're coming up on that time now where we'll start talking about some expiring American League deals that maybe the Moose will have interest in the next couple months. So yeah, it definitely is geared around free agency this time of year.
So, speaking on like a big trade, like you said, the Timo Meyer one, where there's multiple players involved and some of the lower level players that, fans have never heard of, would that be more of your role? Like you were looking at how those players could help the Moose or maybe the Jets in the future. You'd be more, since you're an AHL scout, you'd be looking more at those guys that the fans have probably never heard of, but how can they benefit the team?
Yeah, and again, like there's a lot of people involved in the process. So I'd be a very, very small part of that. There's all the other pro scouts that have seen some of these guys play in the American League. There's the college scouts. There's amateur scouts. But basically, just the gist in my role when it comes trade deadline time, I just build a couple lists, and these are the guys that I've seen who are on NHL deals that are playing in the ECHL or that I've seen in both leagues, the ECHL and AHL. And if they come up as depth pieces in NHL trade talks, these are the guys that I think would provide some value for us. It's a list of maybe 15 guys that I've seen, and that's the extent of my job. And maybe it's a list that's looked at, maybe it's not a list that's looked at. Maybe they're none of the guys I've seen are potential trade partners for the Jets, but I don't have much say beyond that list. But it's important because it's basically no stone unturned, right? The GM of the Moose, who I report to, who's the assistant GM of the Jets, if those depth pieces come to talk, and when they were making a trade with Nashville, if there was some guy that is playing in Norfolk in the ECHL that came up as part of that trade, that's where my list comes in handy. Now this year it didn't, but that's why you got to do the work. That just in case can be critical when it does come, right?
Right. Yeah. You can't be unprepared if you need it.
Yeah.
Do you have to give explanation of why you're putting the guys on the list? They would fit with our team because of A, B, and C, or do you just give the list and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, typically you have ongoing. There's a database that I think 98% of NHL teams use called RinkNet. So you just have ongoing reports on these players, and so basically you build out a list. You send it to your superior, and I imagine most teams work the same way. And then if they have interest in a guy, you can code them in green, yellow, red. Want, maybe, don't want, and then they would probably dive into the RinkNet to see what your reports are on these players throughout the time that you've evaluated them. So that's where the explaining is done. But at the end of the day, there's phone calls and, just one-on-one conversations of why a guy is high on your list or why he's not. There's a lot of factors, a lot of methods that go into final decisions on players for sure.
Yeah. So when you're, doing the scouting, is it, you're just watching videos and highlights online, or are you actually attending AHL and ECHL games for other teams, watching it live?
Yeah, no, most of it's live viewings. So last year, for instance, I watched 210 total games with 145 of them being live viewing. So the rest were video. And I'd say that was heavy on the video side because of COVID played a factor. Like in December of 2021 last year, almost all my viewings were video because you never knew when things were going to get canceled or not. So you don't want to book flights and then end up in a city and games didn't happen or they got postponed. This year, I'm at 167 games seen, and I'd say about 150 of them, maybe a little bit more, are live viewing. So yeah, you're traveling. For me in my specific role, I'm traveling coast to coast amongst 3 different leagues and in a lot of cities. So yeah, it's predominantly live viewings. You can really learn a lot more about a player, his skating ability, his intangibles, and it gives you an opportunity to even talk to some players and other scouts, or sorry, coaches and other scouts, because part of scouting is using your ears, not just your eyes as well. So it's important for a lot of teams, I believe, for to have feet on the ground.
Yeah, have that in-person scout who can, like you said, communicate with people. You're also a licensed level 4 coach in the US and a performance 1 coach in Canada. So what exactly do those both mean?
I mean, that's for me personally. It means you're just furthering your education in the game and learning. And I've been fortunate not only to be in those clinics, but also to present at them and teach at them. But those are levels that you need in both countries to coach in minor hockey or in junior hockey. Now, the jobs that I've had over the last number of years, I haven't needed any of those classifications, but it's just great learning, and it's great ability to kind of sharpen up on your skill set and listen to other coaches present or have the opportunity to present at them. But basically, level 4 in the US is the point where you get to where you don't have to go any higher. There is a level 4, or there's a level 5, but that's kind of like what they call the master's class. And the same thing with high performance 1 in Canada. There's a high performance 2, which is considered the master's class, but high performance 1 is the highest level that you can get where you can coach anywhere in the country. So they're pretty much equivalent in both countries. I've enjoyed doing them. It's more geared towards minor hockey, junior hockey, but it's just a great opportunity to meet people and continuously just learn. And that's what coaching is. You never stop learning, whether you take those clinics or not. And there's other opportunities between NHL coaches seminars or IHF symposiums, or just these other things, like the coaches site does a great job. And some universities and junior teams do their own thing. But for me, it's just all about learning and constantly just picking up new tools or reaffirming some of the things you do. Sometimes you need to hear things you already know to make sure that you're on track.
Yeah, so expanding your knowledge and just, keeping up on things and being polished, obviously a good thing. And would you say that those are more important for people who are just starting coaching? Like something like that could be beneficial in a, job interview, like, hey, I am whatever, level coach, or is it just, again, the knowledge thing?
Again, in terms of it being on your resume, like I think it really only matters in the sense of the leagues that require it. So, junior leagues in the US, junior leagues in Canada, and anything below that, if you're coaching elite AAA or AA even. But I don't think it's more important for a certain kind of demographic of coaches than the other. Like I've been to some of these clinics and I've presented in front of long time coaches, like guys, I've been in the same rooms as guys like Jerry York or Red Berenson at the time, or, I worked for Andy Murray and I take clinics with him or presented in the same clinic as him. And there's no one taking, more feverishly taking notes than those guys. And they've been around the game for 100 years, and I think that's what makes them great, is because they see the importance of it and they're still learning. It's not easy. You look at coaches that are well into their 60s, or in college, you got some guys that are closing in on 70. And that's what Andy Murray was when he was at Western Michigan at the end of his tenure. And it's not easy being that. They don't have those jobs just because that they've been around. They're consistently adapting and learning and taking those clinics. So it's just as important for them as it is a 20-year-old coach that's kind of getting started in the industry, because they need to stay with the curve. And, Andy Murray, who's one of my greatest mentors and someone I really look up to and care about, he pretty much said the day that you think you've figured it out is the day you should retire, because if you stop learning, it's, things are going to catch up to you. So I think it's just as important for a seasoned coach than it is for a new coach, for sure.
I like that how you mentioned adapting. The game is changing so much, even than what it was 10, 15 years ago and what it's going to be in 10 to 15 years now. So obviously players have to adapt, but it's important that the coaches adapt too. So I think that was like a perfect word to describe it. So that kind of wraps up some of the hockey talk, and I figured we could just wrap up the episode with a few random things like, who was your favorite player growing up?
Yeah, so my favorite player growing up was Wendell Clark. He's a longtime captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I was a Maple Leafs fan growing up. I can't say that I am anymore, but those '90s teams, early 2000s teams for me, coming up through elementary, high school, or middle school and high school. Those are the teams I got to watch every night and the games I got to go to with my dad. But Wendell Clark for me, like, he wasn't always the best player. Like he brought a lot of offense to the table, but he was a tough customer and he did things right. And he was just a guy that I really looked up to, not just as a hockey player, but as someone, that how you'd lead your life. Like, you just put it all on the line. Like, the guy had to retire at 34 years old because he just put his body through the meat grinder. And that's kind of how, you mentioned my elite prospects profile. That's pretty much my career. Like, I those international things or those elite showcase things I don't have to do them, but I do them because I just feel like I got to put myself through the grinder, and kind of bringing everything we've talked about full circle, because I don't have that playing experience. So I got to be working. I got to be getting that experience. I got to be networking. And that was kind of the Wendell Clark mentality on the ice. So lo and behold, he was my favorite player when I was growing up, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. What's your favorite food? I know you've got some Greek heritage, so is it something Greek or?
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of favorite foods, but for sure, like, if I had to pick one, and I've answered this question before in a hockey interview, funny enough, but there's a Greek dish, or it's more of an appetizer, but I can make it a dish with how many I eat, called dolmades. So basically, they're stuffed grape leaves, and it's a pretty popular, kind of Eastern European, even Middle Eastern dish. Like, Middle Easterns would call it dolma. In Greece, we call it dolmades. But it was my favorite dish from my late grandmother, and I just loved it. And it's something that one of those things, when you eat it, I'll never find the quality of it that my grandmother used to make, but it always reminds me of my grandmother, so it's special to me. So I'd say that's my favorite food.
Yeah, there's something about foods that when you eat it, you just get that rush of memories from
Yeah.
your childhood or different family members that just make them that awesome.
Yeah.
What is your favorite kind of music?
Yeah, so I'm a really unique person when it comes to that. I can't say that I have a favorite type of music. I'm one of those weird guys that'll go for a 10K run with no music. I work out with no music, and I drive with no music either. And it's not to say I don't love music. Like, I like to dance. I like to go out with my wife and enjoy it. I've been to a number of different concerts, but I've been to concerts from Mumford and Son and Kings of Leon to Jay-Z and 50 Cent concerts. So I'm a chameleon when it comes to music. I'm not a guy that remembers lyrics, but I enjoy the craft of all people that put their work into something. So yeah, I've been to a lot of different concerts, but I can't say I have a favorite type. I really don't. Like, if my Apple Music is playing in the car, you're going to get some Notorious B.I.G. and then you're gonna get Jack Johnson, like, literally track after track. So I'm an enigma when it comes to music. So I like people that work on their craft and make a good product. That's how I'll answer that.
So if you don't, listen to music in the car, and obviously you do a lot of traveling, do you listen to podcasts a lot, or is it just silent?
No, I mean, I'll go with some silence sometimes, but I do listen to some podcasts. Not a lot, like the two I'd say are regular for me when I'm driving, going scouting, especially, are probably the 32 Thoughts podcast and the
Oh
Ray and
yeah.
Drex podcast, just because they're easily accessible on whatever platform you use, and they're covering the mainstream, and those guys are usually first on everything when it comes to hockey news. And it's more news based than the fun side of the game. Like, I know a lot of people like Spitting Chicklets, or a lot of young podcasters like yourself. But if I'm driving for 4 hours, I need to catch up on the news. Those are the two that I'd get into.
Yeah, there's definitely a different, like, obviously variety, like you're saying, of podcasts, what you want. If you want to just catch up on news, the ones you mentioned are good. But if you want some, personality, you want to listen to some stories, then you'd listen to Chicklets, or I guess somebody like me who's interviewing somebody. So there's obviously the different variety. Um, and then we can end on this, when you're not scouting and, crazy hockey life, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do for fun?
Well, my number one thing for fun for me is spending as much time as possible with my family. The summers is great. I'm super dad, and I always try to be super dad, but the summers where you can spend a lot of time with the kids, between water parks and Canada's Wonderland, or just, playing sports outside or the nearby park. Those are really special moments in time for me, especially because of how much time I spend away during the season. So that's number one. Number two, I love to stay in shape and stay fit. So my wife and I are both on the same page with that. So, we run, we're looking at a couple of races that we're going to register for to do together. I spend a lot of time in the gym. So between personal health and fitness and family time, I think if you take good care of both work hand in hand, and you lead a good life that way. So that's those are two priorities for me.
What kind of races are you guys looking at? Like 5Ks,
We're
10Ks?
looking at a 10K actually in May. There's a Sporting Life one here in Toronto that we're looking to do if both our schedules permit, and then we're hoping kind of Labor Day time to do a half marathon together. I've done a bunch of those. My wife actually has never done a half marathon, so it'll be her first. But that's kind of that's the game plan right now. And then obviously after we do a 10K here in the spring, our whole focus through the summer in terms of running training would be getting ready for that half marathon in the fall. So that's kind of what's on our plate right now.
Half marathon. Well, that's pretty,
Yeah,
that's pretty intense.
I've done a few. You do fun ones. Like the last one I did was in Virginia Beach, and they're giving you little Dixie cups of beer every few kilometers. So they're fun. It's just good atmosphere, good weather, and just a sense of accomplishment when you get it done.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's the one thing about racing is, when you cross the finish line, that, like, there's that, like you said, that sense of accomplishment, what you've just accomplished. And most races, you've got to train for quite a while to, get into that peak physical shape. So, it all comes down to that finishing that race. I ran cross country and track in high school. So I was never huge on the distance running. I didn't love cross country actually. But I think I'm going to get back into running. I don't know if I'll ever get to half marathons. I think that's a little bit too far for me, but definitely some fun stuff.
Yeah, I honestly, it's you're competing against yourself, so it gives that level of competition, and it's something that you can continuously get better at as you get older. That and golf, but I'm never gonna get that much. I'm not never gonna get that much better at golf, and my wife's a former golf pro, so I'm never going to reach the pinnacle of beating her, and that's humbling to say sometimes, but it's I'm not going to get there, so I might as well just keep running.
Yeah, focus on the running. All right, that's awesome. Well, I think we did a good job of recapping your career. Like you said, you've done a lot of different things. You've climbed the ladder. And you're pretty young too. For a guy, look at a resume, if they just didn't look at years and they looked at all the places you've coached, I don't think most people would guess that you're under 40. You know what I mean? Like that's really impressive what you've done, and I thank you for coming on this podcast and sharing it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And to any young coaches who are listening, or future ones you talk to, biggest advice I have is just enjoy the journey, and don't ever take for granted the job you're in, because it could be the most important coaching that you do, whether it's for yourself or for one of the players that you get to impact. So I love it. And it's been nice kind of recapping it with you. So thanks for having me, Alex.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice and a great place to end it.
Awesome.